They had waited their whole lives for this trip. For Harold and Lorraine Bennett, a quiet, elderly black couple in their late 70s, it was more than a vacation. It was a promise they'd made to each other 50 years ago. Someday, we'll see Paris. Now, sitting in the airport terminal with their passports and trembling hands, they looked like any other couple waiting for boarding. But there was something different about their eyes. That soft glimmer of pride that comes from surviving enough storms to finally feel deserving of peace. And then, the moment that peace was stolen, it began small. The way the flight attendant's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she glanced at them. The way she skipped their row during pre-boarding. The way her tone shifted, subtle but sharp, when she spoke. Lorraine noticed it first. Harold tried to brush it off. "Don't start, baby. Let's just get there." But deep down, they both knew that look. The one that said, "You don't belong here." Passengers shuffled around them, luggage thumping, announcements echoing. When the attendant finally approached, her voice was clipped and cold. Something about overbooked seats and policy. Her eyes flicked past them like they were invisible. In less than a minute, 50 years of quiet dignity unraveled in public view. Lorraine's hand tightened around her husband's, her heart pounding, her throat dry. Then a voice behind them. "Excuse me, what's going on?" A woman's voice. Young, steady, unafraid. The attendant stiffened. The elderly couple turned, and there she was. A tall black woman in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a calm fire behind them. She held her boarding pass like a challenge. The woman they didn't recognize at first glance, but one who would soon change everything. The moment stretched, silence thick as tension filled the gate. The attendant's smirk faltered. Cameras began to lift. People started watching. No one knew it yet, but that quiet confrontation between a flight attendant, an old couple, and a stranger who refused to look away was about to ignite a storm that would shake an entire airline to its knees. Because what was about to unfold wasn't just about a flight. It was about dignity, memory, and the one woman's decision to stand up, even when no one else did. It began like any other morning at the airport. All hum and motion, the echo of rolling suitcases, the overlapping voices calling destinations from every direction. But for James and Evelyn Brooks, that day was supposed to mean something more than just another flight. James was 71, a retired history teacher with the kind of voice that still carried the rhythm of the classroom, calm, deliberate, filled with quiet authority. His wife, Evelyn, 68, had been a nurse for nearly 40 years, her hands once steady enough to thread needles in dim hospital rooms. Together, they had seen decades of struggle and progress, from marching for civil rights to watching their daughter walk across the stage at medical school. Today's flight was to Los Angeles, a trip to celebrate a new chapter, visiting their daughter, Naomi, who had just accepted a position as a pediatric surgeon. It was their first time flying since her graduation, and though travel had become harder with age, James's knees stiffened from old injuries, Evelyn's heart sometimes irregular. Nothing could keep them from seeing her. Evelyn had packed the night before with almost ceremonial care. A box of Naomi's favorite sweet rolls, wrapped in wax paper. Her father's old fountain pen, polished and tucked safely in a side pocket. A small gift for Naomi's new office. Every detail mattered. Every minute counted. The airport, though, felt different that morning. There was a subtle shift, not in the air, but in how people looked at them. Maybe it was just fatigue, Evelyn thought at first. But there was something about the glances, quick, dismissive, like invisible lines had been drawn around them. They arrived at the gate early, hand in hand, boarding passes ready. The flight attendant at the counter, a white woman in her late 40s with sharp features and a name tag that read Marianne, didn't return their smiles. Her tone was clipped, professional, the kind of politeness that sounded like a closed door. "Names?" she asked, eyes flicking between the couple and the computer screen. "James and Evelyn Brooks," James said, offering their printed tickets. "We're seated in 3A and 3B. Marianne scanned the passes, her brows tightening almost imperceptibly. Those are premium seats. Are you sure you're in the right line? The words were wrapped in neutrality, but the meaning landed heavy. James exchanged a glance with his wife. He had heard that tone before, years ago, when he was younger, stronger, and had the energy to correct it. Now he just smiled. Yes, ma'am. We checked in online yesterday. Marian hesitated, then typed something into her monitor. Her jaw tightened. All right, just a moment. Minutes stretched longer than they should have. Evelyn could feel the people behind them shifting impatiently, the whispers beginning to rise. Finally, Marian printed 2 new passes and handed them over. Here you go, she said. You've been reassigned to 24E and 24F. Enjoy your flight. Evelyn blinked. That's economy. Yes, ma'am. A small adjustment. But we paid. Marianne's voice cut her off, her professional tone hardening just enough to make a point. Ma'am, if you'd like to board today, these are your assigned seats. A silence fell between them. The crowd behind shifted closer. James opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. He could feel Evelyn trembling beside him, not from anger, but from that familiar mix of disbelief and humiliation. They moved aside quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. For the next half hour, they sat in the waiting area, the sound of boarding calls filling the space around them. Every so often, James looked down at the boarding passes in his hand. 24E, 24F. He wondered how easily dignity could be downgraded, just a few keystrokes away. What they didn't know, what Marian didn't know, was that someone else had been watching. A young woman at the far end of the gate, dressed in sleek business attire, laptop open but forgotten. Her eyes had followed every interaction, her posture tightening with every clipped sentence. Naomi Brooks. She had taken an earlier flight from Chicago to surprise her parents at the airport in Los Angeles, but plans had changed. A layover delay rerouted her through the very same city, the very same terminal, where her parents now sat humiliated, waiting to board. She hadn't expected to see them here, but the moment she recognized her mother's trembling hands, her father's forced calm, and the attendant's cold smile, she knew something was wrong. Naomi didn't move at first. She just watched, her pulse quickening, the old memories surfacing. She remembered what her mother used to tell her when she was little. There'll come a time when you'll see it happen, and you'll have to decide whether to speak or stay silent. Naomi had stayed silent before, in hospitals and meetings, in subtle moments where she could feel respect slipping away because of the color of her skin. But this was different. When boarding began, she followed quietly, her heart pounding. Her parents entered the plane before her, walking slowly toward the back, toward seats they had never chosen. Marianne stood by the boarding door, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. Naomi paused. Her eyes locked onto the flight attendants. It wasn't anger she felt. It was something sharper. Clarity. In that instant, she decided she wouldn't stay silent this time, because this flight, this moment, was going to change everything. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as passengers filed in, the shuffle of feet and rustle of coats filling the narrow aisles. For most, it was just another flight, a routine trip marked by polite nods and overhead bins. But for James and Evelyn Brooks, it already felt like something else. Row 24 sat near the back, wedged between the hum of the engines and the faint smell of reheated meals. It was a far cry from the quiet comfort of first class they'd paid for, the kind of seats they'd only started allowing themselves in recent years, after decades of saving and sacrificing. James helped Evelyn into her seat, his knees aching as he stowed her bag. "You all right, honey?" he asked softly. She smiled, kind of tired, practiced smile that tried to hold back the sting. "I'm fine," she whispered. "It's just a seat." But it wasn't just a seat. It was what it meant. They both knew it. They'd lived long enough to recognize the invisible kind of insult, the one dressed in customer service smiles, backed by systems that would swear it was all a mistake. As the plane filled, Marianne moved down the aisle, checking seat belts and storage bins. Her gaze lingered a second longer when she reached them, her lips tightening faintly before moving on. James noticed. Evelyn pretended not to. Naomi, meanwhile, had found her own seat several rows ahead, close enough to see, but far enough to listen. She hadn't told them she was on board. Not yet. She wanted to understand what had really happened before she acted. The intercom crackled to life. "Good afternoon, folks. Welcome aboard Flight 1827 to Los Angeles," the pilot's voice said. "We're expecting clear skies and smooth flying." Naomi barely heard the rest. Her attention stayed on the back of the cabin, on the quiet, shrinking space around her parents. When the plane took off, Evelyn closed her eyes and gripped James's hand. She had always hated flying, but this time her fear wasn't of the air. It was of what she'd felt in that terminal. That lingering sense that, no matter how far they'd come, they could still be reminded of where the world thought they belonged. Half an hour into the flight, the drink cart rolled out. Mary Ann was back, her professionalism polished to perfection. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked a young white couple in row 23. Smiling brightly, they ordered wine. She laughed at something one of them said. Then she reached row 24, and the warmth disappeared like a switch flipped off. "Anything for you?" she asked flatly. Evelyn smiled politely. "Just water, please." Mary Ann nodded, poured from a half-empty bottle, and moved on without another word. James watched the whole thing. He wasn't angry, not yet, just disappointed. He had spent his life teaching young people to believe in fairness, to see the world as something that could be better. And yet here he was, 71 years old, watching his wife be treated like an inconvenience on a flight they'd paid full price for. Naomi's grip tightened on her armrest. Every move Mary Ann made felt deliberate now. Every tone sharpened by something unspoken. She opened her laptop, not to work, just to give her hand something to do. But her mind was elsewhere. She remembered being 12, standing with her parents outside a movie theater after a security guard accused her father of using a counterfeit bill. She remembered the quiet fury in her mother's eyes, the calm, measured way her father explained, again and again, that it was real. It had taken 30 minutes to clear up that mistake. 30 minutes Naomi had never forgotten. And now, here she was again, watching her parents sit in silence, because they knew the cost of speaking up. But something shifted an hour later. A flight attendant, a younger woman with kind eyes, approached the back rows with a tray of snacks. She paused when she saw James and Evelyn's boarding passes tucked in the seat pocket. "Sir, ma'am," she said quietly, "I just wanted to confirm you're the Brookses." James looked up. "Yes, that's right." The attendant frowned slightly. "You're listed under first-class seating. Was there a change?" Evelyn hesitated, glancing at her husband. We were moved. They said there was an adjustment." The young attendant's brows furrowed. "That's odd. I don't see a reason listed here. Let me check with the purser." She disappeared toward the front, and Naomi sat up straighter. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. But when Mary Ann returned instead, the hope dissolved. "Is there a problem?" Mary Ann asked sharply, looking past the younger attendant. The woman held out her tablet. "Their ticket still shows first class." Mary Ann's smile was tight. "That's because there was an upgrade error during check-in. It's been corrected. Please return to your duties." The younger attendant hesitated, then nodded and walked away. James spoke quietly, his voice calm but steady. "Excuse me, ma'am. If there was an error, could we get the difference refunded?" Mary Ann didn't even look at him. "You'll need to contact customer service after the flight." Her tone carried a finality that made clear the conversation was over. Naomi's jaw clenched. That word again, after. Always after the moment was gone, after the damage was done, after it was too late to matter. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, opening the airline's app. It took only seconds to find the booking. There it was, first class, seats 3A and 3B, confirmed. And beneath it, the name, purchased by Dr. Naomi Brooks. The tickets had been her gift. She had surprised them by booking the flight herself, wanting them to travel in comfort. And now, that same gift had become the setting for their humiliation. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her parents didn't know. They had no idea she had paid for those seats. Her mind raced, Every possible way this could end flashed through her thoughts. She could confront Marianne now, call her out in front of everyone. Or she could wait, gather proof, make sure what she said would stick. But as she watched her mother's shoulders shrink a little more with every minute, Naomi realized something. Silence was complicity, no matter how strategic. She stood, slowly, deliberately. Her movement caught a few eyes nearby. Marianne noticed immediately. "Ma'am, please remain seated," she said firmly, striding down the aisle. Naomi's voice was calm but carried weight. "I just need to clarify something about the seating arrangements." Marianne's tone turned clipped. "You'll need to wait until we're at cruising altitude. Please return to your seat." "We're already at cruising altitude," Naomi said evenly. A few passengers glanced up from their screens. The air thickened. Marianne hesitated, realizing her authority was being challenged, publicly. "I'll handle this privately," she said. "Please have a seat." Naomi smiled faintly. "Of course. Privately." When Marianne turned back toward the front, Naomi followed. But this wasn't just a quiet conversation anymore. The eyes of half the cabin followed them. Inside the narrow galley, Marianne's composure started to crack. "What seems to be the problem, miss?" "Dr. Brooks," Naomi said. "Naomi Brooks. And the passengers you reassigned? Those are my parents." Marianne blinked. For a brief moment, her practiced smile faltered. "They were downgraded without cause," Naomi continued, her tone controlled but icy. "You treated them with clear bias and violated airline policy. Their seats, my seats, were confirmed as first class. I have the proof right here." She held up her phone, the confirmation screen glowing bright. Marianne's jaw tightened. There must have been a technical. "Stop," Naomi said quietly. "Don't insult me with that." Silence. Only the hum of the engines between them. Naomi leaned closer. "I'm not just a passenger, Ms. Marianne. I'm a doctor, a public figure, and I've worked with this airline on medical partnership programs. I know your policies. I know your procedures. And I know what discrimination looks like when I see it." Marianne's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted to the curtain. She could feel the attention building behind it. Naomi stepped back. "You're going to fix this. Right now." When Marianne didn't move, Naomi spoke louder, clear enough for the nearby rows to hear. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure the story reaches more people than you can imagine." Passengers turned, heads lifted. The quiet hum of the cabin grew tense. Marianne's professionalism cracked. "You can't threaten me, ma'am." Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not threatening you. I'm promising accountability." And in that instant, the power shifted. The rest of the flight hung in silence, one heavy, unspoken truth filling every row. The kind of truth no one wanted to say out loud, but everyone could feel. James and Evelyn still sat quietly in row 24. They didn't yet know what their daughter had done, or how the ripples of that moment were already spreading through the cabin. But they would soon, because before the wheels touched the ground in Los Angeles, the world would know. The flight descended through a quilt of clouds, the late afternoon sun pouring gold over the cabin's tired faces. For a moment, it seemed the storm had passed. The elderly couple sat quietly now, hands clasped, faces drained but calm. Naomi, their adoptive daughter, kept glancing toward them from the middle seat, every muscle tight, with the restraint of someone trying to hold the world together with her breath alone. But then the intercom crackled. The flight attendant's voice returned, steady, official, and ice-cold. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, please remain seated. Law enforcement will be meeting this aircraft at the gate." The words sliced through the air like invisible glass. A few passengers gasped softly. Others turned to look at the couple. Some raised phones again, sensing a story about to explode. Naomi felt her pulse drum in her ears. The old man's hand trembled slightly on the armrest. "Law enforcement. For what?" She leaned closer, whispering to him. "Don't say a word, okay? Let me handle it." He nodded, eyes full of that weary acceptance only age can sculpt, a lifetime of being told not to fight back, not to make it worse. The plane touched down hard, rubber screeching, hearts rattling in their ribs. And as it slowed, Naomi could already see through the small oval window. 2 airport police vehicles parked beside the jet bridge, lights flickering like blue veins of judgment. Passengers murmured. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Someone else whispered, "It's about time they did something." Not knowing, not caring. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The attendant, her badge gleaming beneath perfect hair, stepped forward and spoke sharply into her radio. Naomi could feel the tremor of self-righteousness in the woman's voice, the posture of someone convinced she was enforcing order. Then came the moment that burned itself into 1,000 phone screens. 2 uniformed officers boarded, one young, cautious, the other older, indifferent. They walked straight to row 14, ignoring Naomi's outstretched hand. "Sir, ma'am," the older officer said, voice perfunctory. "We need you to come with us." The cabin froze. Cameras hovered. Every breath hung waiting. Naomi stood. "You're not taking them anywhere." The younger officer frowned. "Ma'am, please sit down." "No," she said, louder now, her voice carrying over the hum of the engines. "You're not touching them until you hear what actually happened. You don't get to humiliate them twice." The older officer exchanged a look with the attendant, who folded her arms as if satisfied justice had arrived. Naomi saw it then, the quiet satisfaction, the unspoken message. See what happens when you talk back. But Naomi wasn't about to let the moment end there. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out her phone, and hit record. Her voice steadied as she spoke, not for the officers, not for the passengers, but for whoever would one day watch this video from a couch or classroom or courtroom. "My parents were asked to leave their seats because a flight attendant said they looked suspicious. They're 71 and 69. They've flown this airline for 20 years. The only suspicious thing about them is the color of their skin." A murmur rippled through the plane. Someone whispered, "Good for her." Someone else started filming too. The officers hesitated, realizing they were no longer just enforcing rules. They were being watched by history. The older one sighed, gestured toward the front. "Ma'am, let's just step outside the aircraft and talk about this." "No," Naomi said softly. "We'll talk right here, because this is where the humiliation started." For a moment, the whole cabin existed in a fragile balance, the silence before a decision that could go either way. Then, as if the universe itself had chosen sides, a woman across the aisle stood up. "I saw everything," she said. "They didn't do anything wrong." A man in the back added, "Yeah, this is insane." She was the one raising her voice, not them. Dozens of phones tilted upward, capturing the attendant's expression, the flicker of fear, then defensiveness. The officer shifted uncomfortably, torn between authority and accountability. And Naomi, standing with that unshakable calm born of outrage and love, spoke again. "You wanted to make an example of them. Fine, you just did, but not the way you intended." The air hung heavy with that sentence. Then, slowly, the officers stepped back. No arrest, no removal, just a quiet, awkward retreat of power losing its confidence. When the plane door opened, it wasn't the couple who exited first. It was Naomi, her phone still rolling, her heart hammering. Cameras followed her down the jet bridge, like she was walking through the threshold between silence and truth. Outside the gate, the police chief met her. PR representatives were already gathering, faces pale under fluorescent lights. Naomi handed her phone to the nearest journalist. "You'll want this," she said. The clip went online within the hour. By the time the family reached baggage claim, it had already begun to spread. Across social media, people shared it with captions like "Elderly couple humiliated midair" and "Daughter stands up against racist airline policy." Within 24 hours, the airline statement appeared, half apology, half damage control. But what none of the press releases mentioned was what it cost Naomi to speak. That night, in the quiet of their hotel room, her mother reached for her hand. "You did right," she whispered, "but I wish the world didn't make you have to." Naomi looked at her, This woman who had once taken in a frightened black child from a shelter and raised her as her own, and felt the impossible weight of both love and fury. She thought of the faces on that plane, the passengers who said nothing, the ones who filmed, the one who finally stood up, and she realized that racism didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through policies, smiles, uniforms, and waiting rooms. And yet sometimes it met its match in someone who refused to stay quiet. Outside their window, the city glowed, 1,000 tiny lights flickering like the eyes of a restless conscience. Somewhere a news anchor's voice echoed faintly through the wall. The airline is now under federal review after footage of the incident went viral. Naomi closed her eyes, not to escape the noise, but to remember it, to let it become part of her pulse, her purpose. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, interviews, threats, praise, or pain. But she knew one thing for certain. Silence had finally landed harder than the plane ever could. By the next morning, the world had chosen sides. Hashtags flooded every corner of social media. Hashtag justice for the couple. Hashtag racism in the skies. Hashtag fly right or fall. Trending across continents. The video Naomi had uploaded from her phone, shaky but raw, had been viewed 5 million times overnight. News outlets dissected every frame. The trembling hands of her parents, the tight smile of the flight attendant, Naomi's unwavering stare. Her inbox exploded, messages from journalists, activists, strangers. Some sent prayers. Some sent threats. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." In a small hotel room near the airport, Naomi sat by the window, scrolling through it all. Outside, the city was already waking, oblivious to the emotional aftershock playing out in millions of living rooms. Her father slept beside her, chest rising and falling slowly, while her mother sat quietly on the bed, turning her wedding ring around her finger. A nervous habit resurfaced after decades of calm. "It feels like the world's watching us," her mother said softly. Naomi nodded. "They are." Her mother's eyes filled with both pride and worry. "You did something brave, sweetheart. But the internet doesn't always know how to handle brave." Naomi understood. Already, some online comments accuse her of exaggeration, of race baiting, of trying to destroy a woman's career. The flight attendant's name had leaked, and the outrage was mutating, turning into something feral and unfocused. Naomi didn't want vengeance. She wanted change. But social media rarely understood the difference. By noon, the airline CEO released a formal apology video. He stood before a branded backdrop, eyes rehearsed, tone measured. "This incident does not reflect our values. We are launching a full investigation and have placed the employee on administrative leave. We deeply regret the distress caused to the passengers involved." It was polished, careful, painless. Naomi closed the laptop and whispered, "You regret the video went viral. That's what you regret." But the apology triggered something else, a second wave of attention. Civil rights groups reached out. News programs wanted live interviews. Even a late-night host made a segment out of the footage, half outraged, half performative. And somewhere beneath all that noise, the truth, the simple, human truth, threatened to get lost. That evening, Naomi took her parents for a walk through a nearby park. The world was still, washed in the last orange streaks of sunset. Her father leaned on his cane, slower than usual, his mind heavy with everything that had happened. "They've been through worse," he said quietly, as if reassuring himself. "But it doesn't get easier, you know. It just gets quieter." Naomi glanced at him. "You mean the silence after it happens?" He nodded. "People get loud for a while. They post, they shout, they promise change. Then the world forgets. And the next couple they sit on another plane, and it happens all over again." Her mother touched his arm gently. "But maybe this time, people won't forget." Naomi wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe her voice had shifted something, even slightly, in the vast machinery of injustice. A week later, she received an email from a woman named Angela Morrison, a senior vice president at the airline. It wasn't a public statement. It was personal. "Ms. Fields, Your video made us confront something we've ignored for too long. I can't undo what happened, but I'd like to meet you and your parents privately. To listen, not defend. Naomi hesitated. She'd been offered TV deals and sponsorships. None of that interested her. But this felt different. This was what she'd wanted, a human reckoning behind corporate walls. The meeting happened at a quiet boardroom 2 weeks later. No cameras, no press, just the three of them and a few airline executives who looked uncomfortable in their own suits. Angela listened, really listened. Naomi told them how it felt to watch her parents, two elderly, gentle people, treated like intruders in a space they paid to be in. How humiliation didn't end when the plane landed. How silence from bystanders cut deeper than the act itself. Her mother spoke next, calmly, gracefully. "I don't hate that woman," she said of the flight attendant. "I just want her to understand that when she looked at us, she didn't see people. She saw fear, her own fear, and she let that fear make a decision." Angela's eyes softened. "I think that's what we've been doing as a company," she admitted, "seeing fear instead of people." By the end of that hour, something unplanned happened. Not a headline, not a lawsuit, but a seed of accountability. The airline promised to overhaul its racial bias training and to create a passenger advocacy board led by travelers themselves, including Naomi. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Later, in the car ride home, Naomi's mother leaned her head on her daughter's shoulder. "You did more than stand up for us," she whispered. "You made them see." Naomi smiled faintly. Then maybe it was worth it. But that night, when the lights were off and the city was quiet, Naomi couldn't sleep. She thought of all the people who never got filmed, the ones who went home invisible, the ones who never had a daughter in the aisle holding a phone. She realized that the true cost of racism wasn't just in the moments that went viral. It was in the millions of quiet humiliations that no one ever saw, the daily wounds that healed wrong. Weeks passed. The noise faded. The headlines shifted to something new. But in small, unseen ways, change began to ripple, slower than the internet, deeper than hashtags. A year later, a letter arrived in the mail, hand-signed by a name she almost didn't recognize. The flight attendant. "I've replayed the day 1,000 times. You were right. I let fear guide me. I was wrong. I'm trying to learn, and I hope someday I can make it right." Naomi read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as forgiveness, but as proof that even broken things can bend toward light. Her parents still flew occasionally. The airline made sure they were treated with the utmost care, though the gesture was never what mattered. What mattered was the quiet dignity they'd reclaimed, the small victory of walking down a jet bridge not as suspects, but as people. And Naomi, she kept writing, speaking, pushing, not for fame, not for outrage, for memory, for all the unseen flights, the unrecorded wrongs, the lives caught midair between prejudice and grace. Because she had learned something undeniable in those 30,000 feet of humiliation. Justice doesn't begin when people notice. It begins when someone refuses to forget. Outside, the world kept flying, sky after sky, day after day. But somewhere in every passenger's quiet reflection, maybe a sliver of awareness now existed, a silent question before judgment, a second thought before suspicion. Time has a strange way of dulling outrage, smoothing sharp edges into quiet memory. But for Naomi and her parents, the memory never dulled. It became something else, compass. A year after the incident, Naomi was invited to speak at a university seminar on bias in modern travel. She wasn't a celebrity, not even a full-time activist. She was just someone who refused to let what happened become another forgotten headline. When she took the stage, the audience was a mix of students, airline employees, and travelers. Some were curious, some skeptical. Others looked uncomfortable, the way people often do when they realize a story might touch something raw in themselves. Naomi didn't start with statistics or policy talk. She started with a story. "My parents were just trying to fly home," she said simply. They had their boarding passes, their assigned seats, their dignity. But for one woman that day, and for the company that trained her, that wasn't enough. To her, They didn't look like passengers. They looked like a risk. She let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats. And when I stood up, she continued, I wasn't brave. I was scared, but I was more scared of staying silent. A young man in the front row raised his hand. Do you forgive her? Naomi smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't a headline, she said. It's a process. And it's not just between me and her. It's between all of us and the world we build. The room stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that means people are thinking, not waiting to clap. Afterward, several students came up to her. One young woman said she was training to be a flight attendant, and that Naomi story made her realize how much power a single moment of perception carries. Another confessed that she'd seen something similar once and said nothing, and it haunted her ever since. That night, Naomi walked alone back to her car, the cool air brushing against her skin. She thought about how easy it is to scroll past injustice, to tell yourself it's not your fight, to treat someone's pain like another clip in an endless feed. But she also thought about how one shaky video, filmed out of love and rage, had forced the world to stop, if only for a few minutes, and see. In the quiet glow of the streetlights, Naomi whispered something she'd heard her father say once, after one of the worst nights of his youth. Silence is where injustice learns to breathe. She finally understood what he meant. Racism doesn't just survive in open hatred. It thrives in polite avoidance, in the easy comfort of pretending not to see. It hides in systems, policies, faces we smile at every day. And the only way to weaken it is through uncomfortable truth, the kind that makes hearts ache, voices tremble, and eyes open. Naomi didn't want people to feel guilty when they heard her story. She wanted them to feel responsible, because the next time someone is humiliated on a plane, or in a store, or on a street, there will be people watching, and one of them will decide whether that moment becomes another silent wound or the beginning of a reckoning. So she began ending every talk with the same words, simple, unpolished, but unforgettable. Don't just watch. Witness. Don't just feel sorry. Speak. Because silence never saves the victim. It only comforts the bystander. Those words spread far beyond the lecture halls. People began quoting her online. The airline industry even cited her story in new diversity training. And though the headlines had long since moved on, Naomi's message lingered, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Her parents grew older, quieter, more fragile. But every time they stepped onto a plane, Naomi noticed something, a soft change in tone, a new kind of attentiveness from the crew. Small gestures, respectful smiles, maybe coincidence, maybe progress. On one of their later flights, her father leaned over and whispered, "You see that attendant? She's treating us like we belong." Naomi smiled. "That's because we do." When the plane took off, she looked out the window, the clouds drifting below like an endless sea. She realized something profound. The sky itself had no prejudice. It was humanity that carried bias into the air. But if one act of courage could bend that sky toward kindness, even slightly, then maybe that was enough. And that's what she wanted her story to do for others, to remind them that racism isn't a distant issue. It lives in glances and tones, in who gets believed and who doesn't, and that every person who chooses to stand up, however small their stand may seem, is part of the long, quiet revolution toward equality. So now, as her story reaches you, yes, you remember this. When you see injustice, your silence writes the next chapter. Your voice can rewrite it. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Start conversations that feel uncomfortable but necessary. Leave a comment about a moment you refused to stay silent, or one where you wish you had spoken up. Because this isn't just Naomi's story. It's our story. And as long as these moments keep happening, we have work to do. Until the world stops mistaking color for threat, dignity for defiance, and humanity for hierarchy, every voice matters, including yours. So let's make it matter.